The sun hung low over Silver Ridge like a bruised copper coin, bleeding red into the dry arroyo that cradled the town. Dust drifted in slow spirals across the single wide street, settling on everything. Porch rails, hitching posts, the cracked leather of saddles tied outside Hank Rawls's general store. Caleb Thorne eased his steel-gray gelding to a halt in front of the store, let the reins fall slack, and sat a moment longer than necessary, feeling the horse's ribs rise and fall beneath him. He had ridden 300 miles to reach this place. 300 miles of sagebrush and alkali flats, of nights so cold the stars looked sharp enough to cut. 300 miles telling himself the same thing he told himself now. Just information. No trouble. No names. Get what you need and ride out before anyone cares you were here. The gelding snorted, impatient. Caleb swung down, boots striking the boardwalk with a soft thud. He loosened the cinch a notch, patted the animal's neck once, more habit than affection, and stepped inside Rawls's store. The bell above the door gave a tired jingle. Hank Rawls looked up from behind the counter, a man in his late 50s with a face like sun-cracked clay. He studied Caleb the way men in these parts studied strangers. Not hostile, not welcoming, just measuring how much trouble might follow. "Evening," Caleb said, voice low and even. "Need a few things. Flour, coffee, maybe some jerky if you've got it fresh." Rawls nodded slowly. "Got jerky. Coffee's Arbuckle. Flour's in back." He didn't move to fetch anything yet. "Passing through?" "Prospecting." Caleb set 2 double eagles on the counter, gold still bright from the mint. Silver Ridge still got claims worth filing? Rawls's eyes flicked to the coins, then back to Caleb's face. "Some say yes. Some say the water's worth more than the silver, and the man who controls the water controls both." He paused. "You look like you've ridden far." "Far enough." Caleb met the older man's gaze without blinking. "Room at the boarding house still open?" "Abby Hawthorne's place. $1 a night. Breakfast and supper included. No drinking, no gambling." Rawls slid the coins toward himself. "She don't take kindly to trouble." Caleb gave the slightest nod. "I don't aim to bring any." He left the store with a small sack of supplies slung over one shoulder and crossed the street toward the 2-story frame house with the sign Abigail Hawthorne, rooms to let. The windows glowed yellow against the deepening dusk. From across the way, the Iron Spurs Saloon spilled piano music and laughter. Too loud, too sudden, then abruptly quiet when he passed the Batwing doors. He felt eyes on his back, but didn't turn. Inside the boarding house, the air smelled of lye soap and fresh cornbread. Abby Hawthorne, a spare woman with gray-streaked hair pinned tight, looked up from the ledger as he entered. "Evening, ma'am. Room for a week?" She studied him the same way Rawls had. Careful, not unfriendly. $1 a night, paid in advance. Caleb counted out 7 silver dollars. She slid the register toward him. He signed Caleb Thorne in a careful hand, nothing fancy. When he looked up, her eyes had settled on the matched Colt peacemakers riding low on his hips. Straight draw holsters, grips worn smooth from use. Not the cross-draw most gunmen favored. "You a lawman?" she asked quietly. "No, ma'am. Just a man looking for silver." She didn't believe him. He could see it in the slight tightening of her mouth. "This town don't welcome strangers long," she said. "Especially ones asking questions." Caleb took the key she offered. "I don't ask many." Upstairs the room was small, clean, smelling faintly of cedar. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single window looking out over the street. He set the sack down, unbuckled his gun belt, laid it carefully on the chair so the Colts stayed within reach. Then he stepped onto the narrow balcony. The town lay quiet now, lamps flickering in windows, the last light bleeding out of the sky. Down below, the Iron Spurs saloon's doors swung open. A big man in a black vest, Brock Slade, stepped out onto the boardwalk, rolling a cigarette. He struck a lucifer, cupped the flame, inhaled. Then he lifted his head and looked straight up at the balcony. Caleb didn't move. Slade exhaled smoke, turned, and spoke low to someone still inside the doorway. A moment later, another figure appeared, lean, silver-haired, silver mustache catching the lamplight. Silas Kane. He didn't step fully into view. He stayed half in shadow, but Caleb saw the milky left eye lift, fix on the balcony like a pale marble catching moonlight. For a long heartbeat, neither man moved. Then Kane inclined his head, just once, almost polite, and stepped back inside. Slade flicked the cigarette into the dust, smiled once, thin and cold, and followed. Caleb stayed on the balcony until full dark settled over Silver Ridge. The wind came up then, carrying the smell of creosote and distant horse sweat. Somewhere a dog barked once and fell silent. He felt the old weight settle in his chest, the same weight that had ridden with him since Broken Spur, since the graves he'd dug with his own hands. Just information, he told himself again. But the words sounded thinner now. He went inside, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. The Colts lay beside him on the chair, grips toward him, waiting. Down the street, in the Iron Spurs saloon, Silas Kane leaned back in his chair, milky eye reflecting the glow of a single lamp. Brock Slade stood beside him, arms folded. "New man's up at Abby's," Slade said. "Signed Thorne, paid in fresh gold." Silas tapped one long finger against the scarred table. "Thorne," he repeated softly, tasting the name. "Interesting." He smiled then. Not warm, not kind. The smile of a man who has just recognized the shape of an old debt coming due. Outside, the wind rose a little higher, rattling the loose boards of the porch, carrying the faint scent of smoke from a distant cook fire. And somewhere in the quiet, a single thought turned over in Caleb Thorne's mind, like a stone in deep water. They know I'm here. He didn't light the lamp. He didn't need to. The dark was familiar company. The morning sun came up hard and white over Silver Ridge, burning off the night's chill and turning the dust to powder underfoot. Caleb Thorne stepped out of Abby Hawthorne's boarding house with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who had slept little and thought much. His coat was buttoned against the wind that still carried a bite, and the weight of the Colts at his hips felt heavier than usual. Not from the metal, but from the knowledge that eyes had already found him. He crossed the street toward Rosa Valdez's cantina. The place was adobe and weathered timber, low roof sagging under years of sun, a faded sign above the door reading simply Valdez. The scent of fresh coffee and frying tortillas drifted out before he even pushed through the door. Inside it was dimmer, cooler, the air thick with chili smoke and the faint metallic tang of old blood scrubbed from the floorboards. A few early patrons sat scattered at scarred tables. 2 Mexican miners nursing tin cups. A grizzled freighter staring into his plate like it owed him money. In the far corner, 3 men in black vests wore the Iron Spurs brand on their gun belts. They didn't look up when Caleb entered, but he felt the shift. Conversation dropped half a tone, heads turned just enough to track him. He took a table near the wall, back to the room, but not so far he couldn't see the door. Rosa Valdez came over herself, wiping her hands on a rag that had once been white. She was a woman in her middle years, dark hair pulled back tight, eyes that had seen too much but still held fire. She set a tin mug of coffee down without asking. "Black, no sugar," she said quietly. You look like a man who don't sweeten things." Caleb nodded thanks, wrapped his hands around the mug. The heat seeped into his palms, steadying the faint tremor he hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Just a few more days, he told himself. Enough to know where the water rights really lie, then ride out. No blood, no names. He sipped. The coffee was strong, bitter as regret. The door banged open. Brock Slade filled the frame, broad shoulders blocking the light for a second. He scanned the room, eyes landing on Caleb like a hawk spotting movement in the grass. A slow smile spread across his face, not friendly, not cruel, just certain. He sauntered over, boots thumping deliberate on the plank floor. "Morning, stranger," Slade said, voice carrying the gravel of too many smokes and too few regrets. He didn't wait for an invitation. He pulled out the chair opposite Caleb and sat, elbows on the table. "Heard you're prospecting. Silver Ridge got plenty of holes to dig in, but some holes you don't want to stick your hand in." Caleb met his gaze level. "I'm careful where I dig." Slade leaned in, forearms thick as fence posts. "Careful's good, but curious. Curious gets a man dead quick in these parts, especially when he starts asking about water." He tapped one thick finger on the table, slow, rhythmic. "Water's spoken for. You ask the wrong questions about it, you'll find yourself short of breath." The words hung between them like gun smoke. Caleb felt the pulse in his throat kick up a notch, but his voice stayed even. "I'm only looking for silver, mister. Water's just what keeps a man alive long enough to dig." Slade barked a laugh, loud enough to make the miners flinch. He slapped the table hard, once, twice, making the tin mug jump. "Hear that, boys? He's only looking for silver." The laugh died as quick as it came. Slade's eyes narrowed. "Keep looking in the wrong place, Thorne, and you'll find more than you bargained for." He stood, chair scraping back. The 3 iron spurs in the corner rose with him, hands drifting near holsters. Slade glanced at Rosa behind the counter. She had gone still, rag twisted tight in her fists. "Keep your coffee hot, Rosa," Slade said. "Might have company later." He walked out, the doors swinging shut behind him with a hollow slap. Silence settled heavy in the cantina. The miners kept their heads down. Caleb exhaled slowly through his nose, set the mug down without spilling a drop. His hands were steady now, not from courage, but from the cold certainty that hiding was over. Rosa moved then, wiping the counter in slow circles as she came closer. She leaned in under the pretense of clearing a plate, voice barely above a whisper. "They're watching you," she said. "Since last night. Slade don't come in here for coffee. He comes to mark territory." Caleb looked at her, really looked. There was fear in her eyes, but something harder underneath. Loss, maybe. The kind that leaves a hollow place nothing fills. "I know," he said quietly. She straightened, glanced toward the kitchen. A boy's face, Juanito, 12 or so, peeked around the doorframe, wide dark eyes fixed on Caleb. The boy ducked back when he saw he'd been noticed. Rosa lowered her voice again. "Be careful, mister. They don't just watch. They act." Caleb nodded once. He finished the coffee in 2 swallows, bitter to the last drop, and stood. He left 2 bits on the table, more than enough, and walked toward the door. Outside, the sun was higher now, heat already rising off the street in shimmering waves. He stepped down off the porch, boots crunching gravel. Behind him, the cantina door creaked open again. Juanito slipped out, quick and quiet as a shadow. The boy ran after Caleb, bare feet silent on the dust, and pressed a folded scrap of paper into his palm without stopping. Then he darted back toward the alley, disappearing around the corner. Caleb didn't look at the note right away. He kept walking, slow, like a man with nowhere particular to go. But his fingers tightened around the paper, feeling the faint damp of the boy's sweat on it. Across the street, half hidden in the shade of a lean-to, Nate Voss stood with a small notebook in hand. He had seen the boy run. He had seen the hand pass something. He closed the notebook with a soft snap and slipped away toward the Iron Spurs saloon. Caleb reached the boardwalk in front of the boarding house and paused in the thin strip of shade. He unfolded the note with careful fingers. Scrawled in a child's hand, pencil shaky but determined. Sarah Kane wants to meet you. Behind the cantina. Don't let anyone see. He stared at the words a long moment. The wind tugged at the paper, trying to take it from him. He folded it again, tucked it into his vest pocket. Above him, a raven lifted from the roofline with a harsh croak and wheeled away toward the hills. Caleb looked up at the empty sky for a second, then down at the street. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied, sharp and uneasy. He turned back toward the cantina alley. The choice wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. It had already been made. The afternoon heat pressed down on Silver Ridge like a heavy hand, turning the air thick and still. Shadows stretched long across the back alley behind Rosa Valdez's cantina. Narrow, choked with dust and the smell of old grease and horse manure. Caleb Thorne slipped through the rear door just after the lunch crowd thinned, boots scraping softly on the packed earth. He kept his back to the adobe wall, hat low, listening to the muffled piano from the Iron Spurs saloon drifting over the rooftops like smoke. Sarah Kane was already there, small and still in the shade of a leaning water barrel. She looked even younger in daylight. 16 going on 40, eyes too old for the thin face. Her dress was patched at the hem, hands clasped tight in front of her like she was holding herself together. When Caleb stepped closer, she flinched, just a little, then steadied. "You came," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the words. Caleb stopped a respectful distance away, palms open at his sides. "You asked." She glanced toward the mouth of the alley, then back at him. "They're watching. Everyone's watching. Deputy Barrow rode past twice this morning. Said nothing, but he looked." Caleb felt the familiar twist in his gut, the same one he'd felt 15 years ago when he rode back to Broken Spur and found the house still smoking. He pushed it down. "Tell me what you need to tell me, Sarah. Quick and quiet." She pulled a small slate and chalk from the fold of her skirt, things she'd carried since the night the words stopped coming out of her mouth. Her fingers trembled as she wrote, pressing hard enough to snap the chalk once. She wiped it clean with her sleeve and started again. Silas Kane was there that night, stood right in front of the porch, eye like spoiled milk. Father said no. Water belongs to everyone, not just men with guns. Silas laughed, said, "This is the price of interference." Then the torches. They made us watch. Made Father watch the house burn with my brothers inside. Then they shot them. I hid in the root cellar, saw it all through the grate. She stopped writing. Her shoulders shook, but no sound came out. Caleb read the words twice, letting each one settle like lead in his chest. He saw the flames again, not the Whitaker place, but his own. The same smell of burning pine and hair. The same silence after the shots. He knelt slowly so his eyes were level with hers. "You're sure it was him? Silas himself?" She nodded once, fierce, erased the slate with the heel of her hand, and wrote more. He smiled when the roof fell. Said it again. "Lesson learned." Caleb exhaled through his nose. The air tasted like ash even now. I believe you." Sarah's eyes searched his face. She wrote again, slower this time. "There's proof. Cabin up in the hills. Father hid papers there. Maps, letters from Tucson. In the Bible, red cover, third shelf. But it's in a doll now. Corn husk doll. He said raiders never look in children's things." Caleb's throat tightened. He knew the trick, old ranger habit, one he'd taught settlers himself years ago. Hide what matters where no one thinks to look. He reached out, hesitated, then rested a hand lightly on the barrel beside her. Not touching her, just close enough to steady. "I'll look," he said. "I promise." Her chalk hovered. She wrote one last line. "If they find out I talked." She didn't finish, didn't need to. Caleb straightened. "They won't hear it from me." He turned to go, but paused when he heard her small intake of breath. She was staring past him, toward the alley mouth. Footsteps, 2 sets, heavy, deliberate. Caleb stepped in front of her without thinking, hand drifting toward his right Colt. He didn't draw. Not yet. Brock Slade rounded the corner first, Gideon Crow a pace behind. Slade's smile was wide and empty, teeth showing like a coyote's. Gideon carried his rifle loose across his chest, finger near the trigger. "Well now," Slade drawled, stopping 10 feet away. "Look what we got here, little Sarah Whitaker keeping company with the new prospector." He tilted his head, eyes sliding over Caleb like he was measuring a coffin. "You two talking about the weather? Or something more interesting?" Sarah shrank back against the wall. Caleb felt the old rage coil low in his belly. Cold, patient, but he kept his voice level. "Just passing the time of day," he said. Slade chuckled. "Passing time, that's nice." He looked at Sarah. "Your daddy passed time too, didn't he, girl? Look where it got him." Gideon shifted his weight, rifle barrel drifting upward an inch. Caleb's fingers flexed once, then stilled. He could end this right here, 2 shots, maybe 3. But the alley was narrow, Sarah was behind him, and the saloon noise would bring more. He met Slade's eyes. "Leave the girl alone," he said quietly. "Whatever you want, it's with me." Slade's smile widened. "Oh, I know that, Thorne. I surely do." He jerked his chin at Gideon. "We'll let her run home this time, but next time—" He let the words hang. Sarah edged past Caleb, head down, slate clutched to her chest like a shield. She slipped away toward the cantina's back door without a sound. Slade watched her go, then turned back to Caleb. "You're making friends in all the wrong places, mister. That don't end well around here." He laughed once, short, hard, and walked away, Gideon falling in beside him. Their boots echoed down the alley until they turned the corner. Caleb stood alone in the narrow strip of shade. The sun beat down on his hat brim, throwing his face into shadow. He could still smell the chalk dust on his fingers, feel the weight of Sarah's words in his pocket like stones. He looked at the empty alley mouth. Somewhere beyond it, the town kept moving. Horses stamping, a woman calling a child in for supper, laughter spilling from the saloon like it always did, but the laughter sounded thinner now. He exhaled slowly, turned, and walked back toward the boarding house. His hand brushed the note in his vest pocket, the one from Juanito, and he felt the paper crinkle under his thumb. Up on the ridge above town, a raven circled once, black against the white-hot sky, then dropped toward the hills. Caleb didn't look up. He just kept walking. The moon hung thin and pale over Silver Ridge, casting long shadows through the slats of the sheriff's office blinds. Inside, the air was close, thick with the smell of old tobacco, gun oil, and the faint metallic bite of fear sweat. A single oil lamp flickered on the desk, throwing unsteady light across the room's narrow confines, wanted posters curling at the edges, a rifle rack half empty, a coffee pot gone cold hours ago. Caleb Thorne stood just inside the door he'd eased shut behind him. Hat in hand now, the brim creased from where he'd gripped it too hard on the walkover. Sheriff Jonah Reed sat behind the desk, elbows planted, face buried in his palms for a long moment before he looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, the lines around them deeper than Caleb remembered from the street. "You shouldn't be here," Jonah said, voice low and rough. "Not at this hour. Not ever." Caleb didn't move. "I'm here anyway." Jonah let out a breath that sounded more like a groan. He leaned back, chair creaking under his weight. "Slade saw you with the Whitaker girl. Word's already out. They're talking in the saloon. New man stirring trouble. You know what that means in this town." Caleb stepped forward one measured pace. "I know exactly what it means. Sarah told me what happened that night. Silas himself, standing on the porch, gave the order. Made her father watch the house burn with her brothers inside. Said it was the price of interference. She saw it all from the root cellar." Jonah's hands clenched on the desk. The knuckles went white. "You think I don't know?" His voice cracked on the last word. "You think I haven't lain awake every night since, seeing those flames in my head? But knowing and doing are two different things." Caleb pulled the folded note from his vest, the one Sarah had written, and set it gently on the desk between them. She wrote it down, every detail. Silas's face, his words, the way he smiled when the roof fell. Jonah stared at the paper like it might bite. He didn't touch it. "And what do you want me to do with that, Thorne? Pin it to the wall and wait for Silas to come collect it? I want you to remember who you were before he put a gun to your daughter's head." The words landed like a slap. Jonah surged halfway out of the chair, face flushing dark. "Don't you dare!" Caleb didn't flinch. "Your wife and girl are still at his ranch. I know. They're leverage. Only as long as you're useful. Judge Harlan Creed's coming early. Word reached me tonight. Territorial circuit's moving faster than Silas expected. When that judge arrives with warrants, Silas won't need a tame sheriff anymore. He'll clean house, starting with anyone who knows too much. That includes your family. And Sarah." Jonah's breath came ragged. He stared at Caleb, eyes wild with something between rage and despair. "You think I haven't thought that? Every damn day? I wake up tasting ash and blood, and I still put this star on because if I don't..." He trailed off, voice breaking. "If I don't, they die anyway." Caleb's own voice dropped quieter. "They'll die anyway if you keep waiting for a way out that doesn't cost you everything. There isn't one." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind rattling the window pane and the distant, muffled laughter from the saloon down the street. Jonah looked down at the badge pinned to his vest. His fingers moved slowly, almost reverently, and unfastened it. The tin star came away with a faint metallic click. He set it on the desk between them, not throwing it, not slamming, just placing it like a man laying down a dead child. "I don't deserve to wear this anymore," he said, barely above a whisper. "Haven't for a long time." Caleb watched him, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his own shoulders. "Then don't wear it as sheriff. Wear it as Jonah Reed, husband, father, the man who still remembers what the star used to mean." Jonah's eyes lifted. For the first time since Caleb had walked in, there was something besides fear in them. Something raw, almost hopeful and terrifying in its fragility. Caleb nodded once. "So we start." Jonah swallowed hard. What's the play? Judge Creed arrives tomorrow or the day after. We keep him alive. We get Sarah's testimony on record. We get to that cabin before Silas's men do, and we... 3 gunshots cracked through the night. Sharp, deliberate, close. From the direction of the Iron Spurs saloon. Glass shattered somewhere down the street, followed by a woman's scream cut short. Jonah was on his feet in an instant, hand dropping to his empty holster before he remembered, his face drained of color. "That's Silas," he said hoarsely. "That's his opening move." Caleb turned toward the door, listening to the sudden silence that followed the shots. Like the whole town holding its breath. The wind moaned low against the window, carrying the faint smell of gun smoke already drifting on the night air. He looked back at Jonah. The older man stood frozen, staring at the badge on the desk like it belonged to someone else. Outside, another shout rose, angry, panicked, and then nothing. Caleb reached for the door latch. Jonah's voice stopped him. "Thorne." Caleb paused. Jonah picked up the badge, turned it over in his fingers once, then slipped it into his vest pocket, not pinning it on, just carrying it. "Lead the way," he said. Caleb gave a single nod. He pushed the door open. The night air rushed in, cold and sharp, smelling of powder and dust and the promise of worse to come. Somewhere down the street, a horse screamed. And the town of Silver Ridge waited to see who would bleed first. The sun rose bloody over Silver Ridge, painting the sky in streaks of rust and gold. But the light brought no warmth. Smoke still hung low in the air from the night before. Thin, acrid, clinging to every porch post and hitching rail like a bad memory. The street was already alive with hushed voices and quick glances. Doors that usually stood open were shut tight. A few early risers moved fast, heads down, as if speed could outrun whatever had started in the dark. Caleb Thorne walked the boardwalk with Jonah Reed at his side. The former sheriff wore no badge now, just an old duster and the hollow look of a man who had slept in his clothes. Neither spoke until they reached the back door of Rosa Valdez's cantina. Rosa was waiting, arms crossed tight across her chest, Juanito pressed against her skirt like he could disappear into the folds. Inside, the place smelled of yesterday's coffee and fresh fear. Rosa shut the door behind them with a soft click that sounded louder than it should. "They took Sarah," she said without preamble. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook when she poured coffee into 4 tin mugs. Brock Slade and 2 others. Middle of the night. Dragged her out of the back room where she was sleeping. Juanito saw it from the kitchen window. Juanito nodded, eyes wide and dark. He looked smaller in the morning light, like the boy he still was beneath the weight he carried. Caleb took a mug but didn't drink. The heat burned through the tin into his palm, grounding him. "How long ago?" "Before dawn," Rosa said. They didn't even try to hide it. Slade laughed when he saw Juanito watching. Said, "Tell your mother the cantina's next if she keeps company with trouble." Jonah's jaw tightened. He set his mug down untouched. "They're sending a message to the whole town." Rosa's eyes flashed. "Message received. But I won't let that girl die like my husband did, like her family did." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she straightened. Juanito heard them talking. "Silas is bringing more guns from the border. Hard cases. They'll be here by nightfall if they ride hard." Caleb felt the words settle like stones in his gut. He had known this was coming, had felt it building since the first shot last night. But hearing it spoken made the air thinner. He looked at Jonah. "We can't wait for Creed to arrive without protection. Silas will have him watched the minute he steps off the stage. Maybe worse." Jonah rubbed a hand over his face. I know a back trail to the ranch, through the arroyo. Guards are light during the day. Silas always figured no one would dare come at him in daylight. But if we go in, if we fail. He trailed off, eyes distant. The town pays, every shop, every family. They'll burn it all to make an example. Caleb stared into his coffee, watching the surface tremble from the faint vibration of his own hand. He thought of Sarah's slate, the chalk words. Silas smiled when the roof fell. He thought of the graves at Broken Spur, the way the earth had refused to settle right for weeks. He thought of the years he'd ridden alone, telling himself the next town would be the last, the next name the one that closed the book. None of them had. Outside, a low rumble grew. Shouts, the crackle of flame. Caleb stepped to the small window and looked out. Across the street, Hank Rawls's storage shed was burning. Flames licked up the dry timber walls, black smoke boiling into the sky. A small crowd had gathered, but no one moved to help. They just watched, faces pale, hands clenched at their sides. Hank stood in front of his general store, shoulders slumped, staring at the fire like it had taken something more than goods. A boy ran up to him, said something low. Hank shook his head once. Slow, Rosa came up beside Caleb. "That's the warning," she whispered. "Anyone who helps you burns next. Cantina's on the list." Caleb turned back to the room. Jonah was watching him, waiting. Juanito clutched his mother's skirt, knuckles white. "We can't wait," Caleb said finally. The words came out quieter than he meant. "Judge Creed's due today or tomorrow. If Silas gets to him first, or to Sarah, everything ends. We go for the ranch. Get the girl and your family out before the reinforcements arrive." Jonah exhaled, long and ragged. "If we fail, Thorne, the town doesn't just burn, it dies. People leave. What's left won't be worth saving." "I know." Rosa stepped forward. "Then we don't fail." Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "I'll keep the cantina open. Act normal. Draw eyes here while you move. Juanito will watch the street. Tell me if Creed arrives, if Slade's men stir." Caleb looked at her, saw the fear there, deep and old, but the resolve deeper still. He nodded once. Jonah picked up his hat from the table. "Back trail leaves from behind the livery. We ride quiet. No shooting unless we have to." He paused. "And if we have to, God help us all." Caleb didn't answer. He set the untouched coffee down and moved toward the door. Outside, the fire had caught the roof of the shed. Sparks drifted upward like dying stars. The smell of burning pine and canvas filled the street. Hank Rawls turned away from the blaze, walked slowly back into his store, and pulled the door shut behind him. The lock clicked. Caleb stepped into the alley with Jonah at his shoulder. The wind shifted, carrying the smoke toward them, stinging their eyes. From the north, faint but growing, came the rhythmic thunder of hooves. Many horses, moving fast. Not Silas's men, not yet. But someone was coming. Caleb lifted his head, listening. Jonah did the same. The sound swelled, steady and sure, like a promise or a reckoning. Neither man spoke. They just started walking toward the livery, boots kicking up dust that hung in the air behind them like ghosts. The trail up to the Whitaker cabin wound narrow and steep through juniper and rock, the kind of path that made a horse pick its way slow and careful. Caleb Thorne rode at the head, steel-gray gelding stepping light over loose shale, the wind cutting cold across the ridge and carrying the sharp scent of pine resin and dry earth. Behind him, Captain Elias Hawk kept pace, followed by 6 Texas Rangers in loose formation. Men who moved without sound, rifles across saddles, eyes scanning the high ground. They had ridden hard from the arroyo after Jonah Reed peeled off with 3 rangers toward Silas Kane's ranch. No words passed between them on the climb. The only talk had been Hawk's quiet order at the base. "We take the cabin clean. No shooting unless they force it." Caleb had only nodded. The words felt distant now, like they belonged to another man. The cabin appeared around the last bend, a low, weathered structure of split pine and stone, half hidden among boulders. The door hung ajar. 2 horses stood tethered outside, heads down, tails switching against flies. No smoke from the chimney, no movement at the windows. Hawk raised a fist. The column halted. Caleb dismounted first, boots sinking into the thin soil. He handed the reins to the nearest ranger without looking back and walked forward alone, hand resting near his right colt, but not drawing. The wind moaned through the junipers, low and mournful. Inside, the place had been torn apart. Floorboards pried up, shelves swept clean, a table overturned. Dust hung in the slanted light from the single window. Motes turning slow like ash from a dead fire. Nate Voss stood near the hearth, spectacles glinting, a corn-husk doll in one gloved hand. Caleb Crow leaned against the far wall, rifle cradled, watching the door with flat eyes. Voss looked up first. A thin smile touched his lips. "Mr. Thorne, or should I say Sergeant Thorne, small world." Caleb stopped just inside the threshold. "Put the doll down, Voss." Crow shifted, finger drifting toward the trigger. Voss held up a placating hand. "Easy. We're just doing our job. Mr. Kane has an interest in family heirlooms." Caleb's gaze never left the doll. He could see the faint seam where the head met the body, hand-stitched, careful. Jacob Kane's work. The same careful hands that had once drawn maps and written letters begging for help against men like Silas. Hawk stepped through the doorway behind Caleb, rifle at low ready. The other rangers fanned out outside, unseen but felt. The cabin seemed to shrink. Voss turned the doll over slowly. Curious little thing. Almost overlooked it. But Mr. Kane pays for thoroughness. Caleb took one step closer. That belongs to Sarah Kane. Her father hid something inside. You open it, you're stealing evidence. Territorial evidence. Voss raised an eyebrow. Evidence of what? Water rights, or something older? He glanced at Hawk. "Captain, been a while. Didn't expect the Rangers to ride all this way for a prospector." Hawk's voice was calm, almost gentle. "We ride where the law needs us, and the law says that doll stays with its owner." Caleb moved then, slow, deliberate. He reached out and took the doll from Voss's hand. The man let him, fingers uncurling without resistance. Crow tensed, but didn't raise the rifle. Caleb twisted the head gently. It came away with a soft pop of dried husks. Inside, rolled tight, was a sheaf of papers. Yellowed, ink faded but legible. Maps marked with springs and streams, notes in Jacob Kane's precise hand. Dates, threats. Silas's name repeated like a curse. Caleb unrolled them just enough to confirm. His throat tightened. Every mark on that paper was a life Silas had taken or ruined. Every line a reason the Whitaker place had burned. He looked up at Hawk. Jacob Kane wrote it all down. Every threat, every accident. This with Sarah's testimony and Silas for good. Hawk nodded once, eyes never leaving Voss and Crow. Justice, not vengeance, Caleb. The name hung in the air. Matthew, the ranger name he'd buried years ago. Caleb felt it settle like a stone in his chest. He met Hawk's gaze. "I know," he said quietly. "But today, both have to happen at the same time." Boss's smile faded. Crow shifted again, uneasy. Outside, the wind rose suddenly, carrying the faint drum of hooves from the lower trail. Many horses, coming up fast. Hawk cocked his head, listening. That's not our boys. That's Kane. Caleb rolled the papers again, tucked them inside his vest, then set the doll carefully on the mantel. Head reattached, as if nothing had been disturbed. He turned to the door. From the ridge below, Silas Kane rode into view, silver hair catching the light, milky eye fixed on the cabin. Brock Slade rode at his right, 6 more hard men behind, rifles already out. They halted at the edge of the clearing, dust settling around them like a shroud. Silas lifted a hand in mock greeting. His voice carried clear on the wind. Thorne, or whatever name you're using today, come out. Let's talk about old debts. Caleb stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim interior. He didn't draw. Not yet. Hawk moved to his shoulder, voice low. We've got the high ground. They rush us, they die. But if we shoot first... Caleb finished the thought silently. Then I'm no better than him. The wind gusted again, whipping dust across the clearing. Silas's horse shifted, uneasy. Caleb stepped forward 1 pace, into the open. No words. Just the slow, inevitable closing of distance. And somewhere down the trail, the hoofbeats of another group, faint, steady, grew louder still. The afternoon sun bled red across the ridge, turning the junipers into black silhouettes and the dust into a slow, choking haze. Caleb Thorne stood alone in the open ground before the Whitaker cabin, boots planted wide in the thin soil, coat open against the wind that tugged at its hem. The steel-gray gelding waited 20 yards back, reins trailing. Behind him, Captain Elias Hawk and the Rangers held position among the rocks, rifles steady, shadows still. But they did not move forward. This stretch of dirt belonged to Caleb now. Silas Kane rode in slow, silver hair catching the dying light like a blade. Brock Slade flanked him on the right, Rufus, Blade Malone, and Travis Holt on the left, 6 more hard men strung out in a loose line. Their horses stamped, uneasy, nostrils flaring at the scent of powder that already hung faint in the air from earlier skirmishes down at the ranch. Silas reined up 20 yards out. He sat easy in the saddle, milky left eye fixed on Caleb like a dead moon. In his good hand, he held a folded newspaper clipping, yellowed, edges frayed, the one that carried the woodcut of a younger man standing beside 3 fresh graves. Broken Spur, Texas. 15 years gone. Silas lifted the paper. Recognize this, Sergeant Thorne. His voice rasped, carrying over the wind without effort. Or do you prefer Matthew these days? The boy who came home to smoke in silence. Thought you'd ride away from that forever. But here you are, still chasing ghosts. Caleb didn't answer right away. The wind gusted, whipping dust across his face. He tasted grit and old blood, his own, from the shallow graze on his left shoulder, where Slade's man had clipped him during the rush on the ranch trail. The wound burned steady, a reminder that flesh gave way easier than memory. Silas smiled thin. You think you're different from Zeke Caldwell? From me? You've killed for less. 7 men tied to that name, all justice, all resisting arrest. But we both know the truth. You hunted them because they took what was yours. Same as I took water, same as I took lives. You just pinned a badge on it. Caleb's right hand rested near the Colt, thumb brushing the grip. He felt the old rage coil, cold, patient, familiar, but he kept it leashed. Sarah Kane's safe, he said quietly. Jonah Reed got her out. Your wife and daughter too, Sheriff. One of your boys died trying to stop it. The rest are cuffed or running. Judge Creed's got the papers now. Your network's done." Silas's smile didn't falter. "Safe for tonight, maybe. But girls like her, they don't stay safe long when men like us are still breathing." He leaned forward in the saddle. "You could end it here. One shot, clean. No trial, no questions. Just like the others." Caleb exhaled slow. The wind moaned through the rocks. He thought of the graves at Broken Spur, the small one in the middle, barely long enough for a child. He thought of Sarah's slate, the chalk trembling in her hand. He thought of the oath he'd sworn in Austin all those years ago, words that had once meant something. "I've killed 7 men tied to Zeke Caldwell," he said, voice level. "Everyone faced a judge first, or drew on me when they had no other choice. You'll be the 8th, but you'll face the law, not my gun." Silas laughed, short, harsh, noble, but you'll never outrun what you are. He dropped the newspaper. It fluttered once, then caught the wind and skittered across the dirt. His right hand moved, slow, deliberate, toward the custom Colt at his hip. Caleb drew. 2 shots cracked almost as one. Silas's bullet went high, whining harmless into the red sky. Caleb's struck true, center of Silas's gun hand. The ornate Colt spun away, blood blooming dark on the silver-haired man's sleeve. Silas grunted, lost his balance, and fell hard from the saddle, landing on his back in the dust. Brock Slade roared and spurred forward, revolver clearing leather. The Rangers opened up from the rocks. 3 sharp cracks. Slade jerked once, twice, then slumped sideways, horse-bolting with him still in the stirrups. The body dragged a few yards before the boot came free. Slade lay still in the dirt, face down, blood pooling beneath him. The other men froze. Travis Holt's hand hovered near his gun, then slowly rose. The rest followed. Hawk's voice cut across the clearing. "Hold fire. We take them alive." Caleb walked forward, boots crunching over shale. Silas lay propped on one elbow, good hand clutching the ruined right, face twisted in pain and disbelief. Blood soaked his cuff, dripping steady into the dust. Caleb knelt beside him. The wind tugged at both their coats. "You could have killed me," Silas rasped. "Why didn't you?" Caleb met the milky eye. "Because death's too quick, too easy. I want you to live, Kane. Live to stand in a courtroom. Live to hear Sarah Kane testify. Live to watch everything you built burn down slow." Silas's lips pulled back in a bloody smile. "This isn't over, Thorne. Men like me, we don't end clean." Caleb reached for the cuffs at his belt. "We'll see." He snapped them on Silas's wrists, careful of the shattered hand. The metal clicked shut. Hawk approached, rifle lowered. "We've got the ranch secured. Sarah's with Jonah. Creed's safe in town. It's done." Caleb stood. The sun was lower now, shadows stretching long across the ridge. He looked at the fallen men, Slade's body cooling in the dirt, the others cuffed and sullen. He looked at Silas, still breathing, still glaring. Then he looked west, toward the horizon where the sky bled into the desert. The wind carried the faint smell of smoke from the town below. Hank Rawls's shed still smoldering, perhaps, and something else. Something distant, unfinished. He felt the wound in his shoulder throb once, steady like a heartbeat. Hawk stepped closer. "You coming back with us?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He just stared at the far line of hills where the light was dying slow. Somewhere down the trail, a raven croaked once, harsh, lonely, and lifted into the red sky. Caleb turned back to Hawk. His voice was quiet. Autumn had come to Silver Ridge like a quiet promise kept. The cottonwoods along the dry wash turned gold and dropped their leaves in slow drifts, carpeting the boardwalk in brittle yellow. 3 months had passed since the ridge above town ran red with sunset and blood. The Iron Spurs saloon was gone, its sign torn down, its walls whitewashed and renamed Silver Ridge Miners' Hall. Lanterns hung from the new porch rafters now, spilling warm light onto the street each evening. Laughter came easier these days. Real laughter, not the brittle kind that covered fear. Jonah Reed stood on the boardwalk outside what used to be his office, arms folded, watching the town breathe again. The tin star on his vest was different now. A U.S. Marshal's badge, heavier, brighter, pinned there by recommendation from a man who never stayed to see it happen. He touched it once, absently, then let his hand fall. The weekly stage from the territorial capital rattled in just before dusk, dust boiling up behind its wheels. Sarah Kane stepped down first. Taller somehow, shoulders straighter, the haunted shadows in her eyes not gone but quieter, like embers banked for a long night. She carried a small satchel and a sheaf of papers stamped with a territorial seal. Captain Elias Hawk followed, helping her with a steady hand, then turned to Jonah. "Marshal Reed," Hawk said, voice carrying the old respect. "She did good up there. Testimony was clear. Silas Kane got life at Santa Fe Territorial, no appeal. The Water Commission ceded. Fair shares for everyone." Jonah nodded slowly. "She's the youngest delegate they've ever had." Sarah walked toward them, boots scuffing the new boards. She stopped in front of Jonah, looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much fire. "Thank you," she said simply, "for coming that night, for believing me." Jonah swallowed once. "Wasn't me, Sarah. It was him." She looked past him, toward the northern ridge where the cabin still stood empty, its secrets pulled into the light and carried away in evidence bags. "I know." Rosa Valdez came out of the cantina then, wiping her hands on her apron. The place had grown. 2 new tables, a longer bar, lanterns burning bright. She crossed the street and pulled Sarah into a quick, fierce embrace. "You're home," Rosa said, voice thick, "and the town's still here because of you." Sarah stepped back, looked at the miners' hall, the lit windows, the people moving freely under the lanterns. "He taught me something," she said quietly, before he left. "He said living well is the best revenge. Not killing, not hating, just living, building what was burned." Rosa nodded, eyes shining. He was right. Hawk cleared his throat. "We're pulling out at first light. Rangers have other trails to ride." He looked at Jonah. "Caleb sent word through me. Said Silver Ridge needs a man who'll stay. Said you're that man. That's why the badge." Jonah looked down at the star again. "He recommended me?" Hawk's mouth quirked. "In his way. Didn't sign it himself, hates ceremonies." But the governor listened. Jonah exhaled, long and slow. "Where is he?" Hawk glanced south, toward the open desert beyond the ridge. "Riding, always riding. 2 of my boys are trailing him. Far enough back he can pretend he doesn't know. He pretends. They pretend. It's how it works with him." Sarah followed Hawk's gaze. "He won't come back, will he?" Hawk shook his head once. "Not to stay. Some men carry their ghosts too close. They don't settle. They just keep moving so the ghosts don't catch up." The street quieted as the sun slipped behind the hills. Lanterns flickered brighter against the coming dark. Somewhere a piano started up in the miners' hall. Slow, steady, like a heartbeat finding its rhythm again. Jonah turned to Sarah. "You staying with Rosa?" "For now. she said. Then maybe the ranch, when I'm ready. It's mine again. Water's mine again. Father would have liked that. Rosa put an arm around her shoulders. Come inside. Supper's hot. They walked away together, Sarah glancing once more toward the south. Hawk touched the brim of his hat to Jonah. Safe trails, Marshal. Jonah watched the Rangers mount up and ride out, dust trailing them like a long sigh. He stood alone on the boardwalk a moment longer, then walked to the edge of town where the road stretched south into the gathering dark. Far out there, miles already, a single rider moved steady against the horizon. Steel-gray horse, black duster lifting in the wind, shadow long and thin across the sand. Caleb Thorne didn't look back. He never did. Jonah lifted a hand in silent salute. The rider didn't see it, or if he did, gave no sign. The wind came up then, cool and dry, carrying the faint smell of sage and distant wood smoke. Somewhere in the hills a raven called once, harsh, lonely, and fell silent. Jonah turned back toward the lit windows of the town. The piano played on, steady now, like it meant to keep going all night. He stepped off the boardwalk and walked home. Behind him, the road south stretched empty under the first stars, and somewhere farther still, a man rode on, carrying 15 years of graves and one unclosed book. The trail didn't end. It never did. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice, imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.